Hey everybody, it's John Kadlic with the latest edition of Trail Talks. Today I'm in Netherlands on the Mud Lake Trail with a new friend of mine, Ian MacGregor, the CEO and co-founder of Skratch Labs. We've got a lot to cover today, and I've been a longtime fan of Skratch. So thanks for coming out and spending some time with me, and a new hike for me. So I get to add to my roster, Ian.
It's awesome. Yeah, thanks for having me, John, and appreciate the kind words and support.
Yeah, you bet. Well, I'm more familiar with Skratch than the average person might be, so maybe a good place to start is tell us a little bit about how the company came to be. I think the founding story's got a lot of interesting elements to it.
Yeah.
So maybe you could start for us somewhere around there.
Yeah, so I think by and large, in many ways, Skratch was a happy accident. And its origins dates all the way back to 2006, 2007 timeframe. And at that point in my life, I was a professional cyclist, and my business partner, and very much the face of Skratch Labs, and Skratch's founder, Alan Lim, was a sports science director for a couple different teams in the World Tour and pro cycling. And the bottom line was, we had sponsors who gave us lots of stuff, and we liked to complain about it, and it didn't work that well. And oftentimes we sort of felt ourselves, feeling sick.
Yeah.
And I think in some ways, you don't realize it, but a lot of elite athletes are a little bit like a canary in a coal mine, whereby they're overly sensitive to anything that might be in the product. And so what was happening is, you could have a couple drinks of something or a couple bars or a couple gels and you'd be okay. But if you do that for a whole day, across a whole week, or 3 weeks like at the Tour de France, ultimately people started getting sick and a lot of gut rot, and stomach complaints, etc. So Alan just started trying to make his own. And I think what happened was there wasn't an initial plan to market it. There wasn't an initial plan to sell it. And because of that, he was sort of free to focus on one thing and one thing only. And that was solving the problem, right? Of trying to make the best product out there. And it didn't happen overnight. I think Alan, started with the science, but what he had was access to basically a never-ending supply of test dummies. And, I remember being a small part of one of those test dummies and, trying some of the samples that he would bring down and sometimes just saying, absolutely no way. And in other cases, as things improved and got better, right, you started to find yourself craving it. And what ended up happening was he made this product that sort of became jokingly known as secret drink mix. Because what we had was, the sponsor's water bottle, but what was in there was the stuff that Alan was making.
I didn't know that part.
Yeah, 1 or 2 pounds at a time. No joke, in a KitchenAid mixer in his apartment in Spain. And that was it. If you flash forward a few years, I personally developed an iliac artery condition.
Okay.
That kind of pushed me out of the sport, and started connecting with Alan and working on some other things, and I had gone back to college. But my former teammates, his colleagues, our friends, kept asking us for this secret drink mix. And at first we were basically like, no, I'm not getting you any of that. It's a pain in the ass. I don't want to make it. And then they were like, well, can we buy some? And we're like, well, yeah, I guess I got to pay them more. Okay, yeah, sure, I'll make you a little bit. And what we ended up doing, John, was basically we went to McGuckin Hardware. We bought these 5-gallon paint buckets, and they told us that if we bought those buckets that they would give us a lifetime of free shaking. And I don't think they knew what they were getting themselves into. But we would mix the ingredients together, take it to the hardware store, put it in the paint shaker, shake it up, scoop it out, and that's what was getting consumed at biggest bike races in the world for about a year. And that was it. That was a happy accident that started the business.
That's an incredible story. I just love that. So take me on the next step in the conversation, because you started in the cycling community.
Yeah.
And again, it could be part of the happy accident part of the story, because you guys were all cyclists and et cetera, et cetera. But relating to other brands that tend to go to market early and want everyone to buy their product versus people that are super focused and kind of stick to a niche and really rock it there before they decide to go out. Yours kind of naturally developed that way perhaps, but how did that all go? Was it all cycling all the time, or when were you trying to think through different decisions there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really big question, right? It's sort of like an onion. You could peel back all sorts of pieces of it. So I think a few things, and I'm sure I can't address this completely, otherwise we'd, be out here till neither of us could walk anymore. Yeah, totally. But a couple things come to mind. First, because we fell into this, I think that some of the standard business practice of identifying a core consumer, trying to understand what you're doing. Like that, all of that was a foreign language.
Yeah.
It wasn't something that we were familiar with. And in some ways, I think that was an advantage at the time.
Yeah, yeah.
I think that what we saw was there was a problem that needed to be solved. And I think because we weren't focused on trying to address a market or how big a market was or any of those other questions, we just were focused on solving problems. And I think that what that gave us was the ability to actually solve the problem.
Right.
Because it wasn't conflated with these other trade-offs that come from scaling or market size or, you know, the other pieces that, you know, I think in business a lot of times we are thinking about. So that was sort of piece one. I think piece two for us is that I distinctly remember an experience I had probably 6 or 8 months into what is now Skratch Labs. So this is back in 2011 when it was still known as Secret Drink Mix. But I remember a woman called our customer service line, which literally just forwarded to one of our cell phones, right? It wasn't, sounds fancier than it is.
Fake it before you make it?
Totally, absolutely. But the gist of the story that she shared with me was very simple. She had just finished the first marathon of her life on her 55th birthday. And she told me that she had been trying for 10 years and had never been able to get to the finish line. And the reason that she wanted to tell me about was because of this secret drink mix. And I think in that moment, the thing that I realized, and you know, give me the benefit of the doubt here, like I was coming from sort of a place of a little bit of arrogance and judgment where I saw her as an everyday person. And I certainly realize now, right, somebody completing a marathon at 55, that's not an everyday person. I mean, she's obviously exceptional and I give her huge credit for that. But I realized that this problem, right, of gut rot wasn't just confined to Olympians or cyclists at the Tour de France, but that it actually, you know, affected, again, what I thought of as everyday people, you know, but certainly there's athletes of all types. And I think that was a bit of an aha. The other piece of that specific story is like, for me, at that point, that felt a lot more meaningful than trying to help my old teammates. Yeah. I didn't want to help them. I was kind of bitter about that world, you know?
Right.
So this idea of helping this woman, you know, achieve a lifelong goal of hers, that resonated. That felt good. That felt like an opportunity to give back. And I think to try and connect the dots on the circle, or the question you asked here, you know, the reality is that solving that problem is something that we've stayed fixated on. And yes, the market could be larger if we wanted to make something, you know, say, you know, a sugar-free product, or use artificial or non-nutritive sweeteners. Like certainly you can get a larger market, but that's not solving the problem.
Right.
In fact, I think it's the opposite of it. And that's just not something we're interested in.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it sounds kind of simplistic in some ways, but you're right. It's easy as a business leader, owner, somebody who's chasing dollars, to think in those sort of abstract concepts. What's the market size? What are our key differentiators? How are we going to distinguish ourselves from all the other players out there? When if you focus on making something that works very effectively and relying on that as sort of your central theme, almost all the other stuff can fall into place over time, it seems like, in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, I think, right, as business owners, so, you know, it's not that simple, right? There's plenty of opportunity for mistakes. There's a lot of choices and trade-offs to be made. But I do think that it's important to, you know, address your market before you look for the next one.
Exactly. All right, so in some ways, I look at you guys as kind of the OG of early disruptors in, let's just say, sports nutrition, hydration, however you want to categorize it. And then, you know, all the name brand players that we could come up with in our mind's eye. But it sounds like in those earliest days, that wasn't top of mind for you necessarily. But as you got more into sort of building a business, I'm assuming that became more front and center in some ways. So like, how'd you think about that back in the days, little old Skratch?
Yeah.
Going against these big players backed by huge corporations and massive distribution and all the things.
Well, you know, I think another place where in some ways ignorance sort of helped us out. And this is something that I shared. I did a quick lecture at a university a couple weeks ago, and something that I shared with the students was, you know, if I knew then what I know now, I don't think we ever would have started. And I think that as much as you see the competition that exists now, it existed then too. And certainly maybe it's changed, but even back then, you know, if you sat around and looked at the industry and did a, you know, let's go like classic, like 5 Forces, Michael Porter here on it.
Yeah.
You'd say, no, don't go there. That's not a good idea. But fortunately, like, we didn't know any of that shit.
Yeah. ignorance is bliss a little bit.
And I told 100%,
Yeah.
100%. And I think, it's important to understand, or at least acknowledge, the role that luck can play in these decision points in our life. And I think that's one. As far as, what that means now, I wouldn't say that it keeps me up at night. It doesn't. But it is a constant, input, right, into the choices that we're making. And I think, it's a tough industry from that standpoint, right?
Yeah.
The barriers to entry are very low.
Yep.
There are these micro niches that people can go after as marketing and, influencers have come in versus, say, athletes. Like, that's expanded, So, it's a great industry to enter. It's interesting, though, because I think a little bit like, I don't know, say the craft beer space in Colorado. Things feel like maybe they've balanced out some too, in the sense that there are a lot of businesses that are going out of business as well. It's not just folks coming in. So
100%.
I don't know what all that means. We'll find out together, I guess.
I guess. You are in a very noisy space now. You've tracked it much closer, certainly, than I have over the years and such. But I'd be hard-pressed to think of a time when there's not more competitive forces in the marketplace. And you're right, there's a shakeout that's inevitable. There's not enough room for all these people.
Yeah.
So I think making choices on where you distinguish yourselves. And the old formula kind of in the space was get these athletes out there doing their thing. And that would be, kind of the race in some ways, as far as marketing strategies are concerned.
Yep.
But now you got John Influencer, who might have his own little following.
Yep.
Might not be a super athlete of sorts, but does enough that captures interest with people. And I could theoretically just be as effective, if not more so, than a professional athlete.
Could be, yeah. But I think the piece that makes it so that I'm not up at night is really just a real belief that you've got to actually solve the problem.
Yeah.
And I think, not to naysay or attack anyone specifically, but I do think that there's a lot of trend chasing. And I think that there's a lot of me too. There's a lot of looking for the latest, greatest, macronutrient that we're either going to villainize or put up on a pedestal and say, that's it. And, I think we've just in some ways seen those cycles and the time in them accelerate, So if we think back to, what the, late 80s through the 90s, where fat was out, right?
Fair.
And then right now it's carbohydrates, but those timelines and those cycles are accelerating. And so I think, where I have confidence is if you haven't built your business, if you haven't built your marketing on one of these trends, on just counting on having the tailwind of that, and you're back to solving a real problem that people have in their lives, I think you have a better chance.
Increase the odds for sure.
Yeah.
Talk to me about the cafe. So I know it's been, a few years now?
Yeah.
Since you opened the cafe in Boulder. I'm just curious, is that like a test space, a way to engage the local community? Is it a home base? Is it all these things and more?
Yeah.
How do you think about the space?
Yeah, great question. So cafe's been around for about 3 years now. And I think in short, yes, it's all of those things. One of the interesting pieces, if we go back in Skratch's own genesis and history, when we first were sitting around figuring out how we were going to get some exposure for our business and how we wanted to try and, bring our solution, if you will, to more people, we were looking at what we had to spend on marketing. And we realized we wanted to go to some events, and we realized that we would spend the entire year's budget, which was $30,000, to go to a single event. And that just didn't feel right? It didn't feel tenable. And so what we did at that point was we said, hey, what if we thought about this differently? And instead of spending $30,000 to go to one event, we spent $30,000 and bought ourselves a food truck. And we were very fortunate to be very close with Chef Bijou Thomas, who had cooked for a bunch of the pro cycling teams. And you were able to work with him to develop a menu and work with Alan around the cookbook that they've written, the Feed Zone, to support athletes, at those events. Hi. And so instead what we did is go to that first event, and we sold a bunch of food, which helped us recoup some of that cost so we could go to the next event. And so this is back in 2012. We supported People for Bikes in like a 3-week-long tour. A bunch of different things. So for us, food has always been a big part of what we're doing. And the challenge we ran into is that the logistics of bringing that food truck from literally across the country. Like at one point we had to take it from Monterey, California, and bring it down to where there's a climbing event called 24 Hours of Horseshoe Hell was existing, which is down in the southeast. And, that's a big trip, right?
Yeah, it is.
Anyways, it got so complicated and there's so much liability on hand that we had to stop. And so we'd always sort of had our eye towards how can we cultivate that beautiful experience, that community environment in Boulder. And so, the cafe's where we've chosen to manifest it.
And it's certainly been a groundswell and a hub for a lot of activities. You can see groups that meet there, whether it's runners or cyclists or just people having a coffee meetup.
Yeah, absolutely.
I just think it's neat the way it's organically developed. And Skratch on tap for free.
And Skratch on tap for free.
One of the best things in town that people might not all know about, and things of that nature.
And John, I have a secret for you.
Yeah, what's that?
That will now not be a secret. We're moving it.
Oh, you are?
We are, yeah. So, the building that we're in was part of a larger lease that was subleased a few different times. Very complicated situation. And, ultimately the landlord needs to lease the entire building before they give up the section that we have. And so renewal wasn't an option, but we've been really, really fortunate. We've got a lease in place at 2445 Alpine. So right in that Ideal Market Shopping Center. Yep. And we will be open in August. So we've been working on that.
That's awesome.
For
Breaking
about a
news.
year. Yeah, totally.
Good for you guys. Same general size or bigger, smaller?
It's a bigger space, which is really exciting. So a lot more seating, and also a little easier parking, and a lot more sort of, not just seating, but sort of like space in the area, right? In terms of room for, group runs to meet, for cyclists to have their bikes stored, etc. So, taking what we've learned and trying to improve, on the good parts and trying to, improve on some of the parts that weren't so good.
Okay, that's awesome. Well, I'll be there to check it out the day you open. So.
Well, thank you.
I want to go another direction, so and I'm going to mix a couple questions together into one. You were a professional athlete, and not everybody can attain that level of achievement athletically, and that comes with a commitment and competitive drive that's unique and different. I also know you went back to a graduate program at MIT.
Yep.
Not too long ago.
Yep.
And I'm just curious, in their own unique ways, you as an athlete, you as a student, if you will.
Yeah.
How's that impacted the way you lead or manage or work with others? You can
Yeah.
take them individually or combine them, whatever works for you.
A few things. When I think about athletes, or if you see Division I competitive athlete on somebody's resume, like what does that mean to us, right? As somebody who has to hire folks, right? First and foremost, that's not a yes or a no, right? I don't think there's anything that we ever do or don't do that creates an absolute like that.
Yeah.
But what is it an indicator of? And I think a few things. One is, you learn discipline, you learn grit. You're able to get through bad days quite often, right? Overall, kind of this big bucket that I would maybe just call excellence. And I don't know, like whether in business or life or athletics, excellence is awesome.
Yep.
100%.
100%.
So I think that one thing I've seen, over the last 15 years in running a business and growing a team is that, you can certainly find it elsewhere, but more often, right, there's a higher concentration of a lot of those same traits in folks who have been, athletes. And it certainly has changed, or my view on athletics has changed and evolved. I think when I was younger, I was very snobby about it, and I certainly was like, look, if you're not paying your mortgage doing this, like it doesn't count. I don't think that's the case. When I volunteer at the elementary school here in Netherlands, and we do these mountain bike days where we get all kids on bikes, you see the impact that day, in some cases, literally learning how to ride without training wheels has. You can't tell me that is about,
Magic.
Elitism.
That's right. That's magic.
So I don't know. I think that we can apply those life lessons regardless of what level we're at.
Yeah.
And that's certainly evolved for me.
And then what about your desire to go back and focus on some academic stuff?
Yeah, another maybe challenging question to answer, but first and foremost, something I've also learned about myself, I'm just curious. Like, I like it. It doesn't, there's nothing about it. It's fun. And that's what motivates me in life, frankly. And I've learned to embrace that and accept it and, not think of it as a waste of time, but to think of it as actually the value, right?
Yeah.
That's what time is for.
Yeah.
But I think proactively, one of the things that I have seen in myself, and just for myself in the organization, is that as we've been lucky enough and fortunate enough to have the business grow and scale, you know, whether from fear or awareness or both, you know, or some other things, like I just don't want to be the bottleneck for the organization. And I think that in the future, it's still very possible that I might become that. But for me, because of that, I've always been proactive about looking for ways to learn, to grow, you know, to develop personally and professionally. I think they're kind of the same damn thing. But, you know, whether it's EQ skills or whether it's framework, it doesn't matter, right? Like to kind of keep pushing on that envelope. And so, you know, one organization along the way that was immensely beneficial for me personally, professionally, in life, EO, Entrepreneurs Organization.
Yes.
I mean, I owe that organization, you know, a ton.
Yeah.
And also, you know, I found that there was a point at which that learning curve flattened, and I went looking for the next thing. And, you know, that was back in, 2017, 18. And I sort of cast a wide net to see where else I would end up. I think the assumption that I had going into that was I was going to hire, you know, a fancy executive coach, you know, who could be half therapy and half push and all that. But I also started looking at some of the formal education programs, in some ways just because I wanted to be able to argue why I didn't do one. You know, somebody challenged me on it. And, you know, I was fortunate to connect with some folks through networking and, you know, be able to go out and do a preview day, essentially, of the program they have at MIT Sloan. And it was very simple. It went from this calculated sort of like head conversation of like, you know, pros and cons and this and that, to like a heart choice, which was just, I want to do this. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I had to figure out how to get in, which that was a stressful thing. But, yeah, very, very lucky to have made it happen. And it was a very challenging few years to do that and keep running a business. COVID happened at the same time, so I started in 2020. And man, it was hard. I mean, it was burning the candle at both ends.
So I'm curious about what you see on the horizon for your space, and you know, any trends that you're following, or you know, what do you see for the brand?
Yeah, well, that's a lot of questions there. Let's start with, you know, this. When you say the space, I think about this category of health and wellness in general, which frankly, I don't know that I could define it right the same way you would define it. But a couple things. One, just societally, I don't know. I'm excited that people care about these things.
Yeah.
I'm excited that physical health, mental health, work-life balance or harmony or any of these things, whatever you want to call it. I'm pumped that we talk about this stuff. I'm pumped that it's okay to come to your, I mean, it is at Skratch to come and say, hey, I need a mental health day or I need a week. I think that's a good thing.
Yeah.
So that's first and foremost. I think the second thing is, you know, again, I continue to see an enormous amount of extremism where we find the end-all be-all solution. And again, whether maybe that's, you know, amount of protein or cutting out carbohydrates or, you know, fat or good fat. Like it's just, and it's so interesting how these cycles just happen. I mean, another one, right, that we saw, I think, not just here in and around Boulder, but, you know, happened very quickly. You know, CBD.
Right.
And was it the amazing miracle potion that everyone thought it was the first 2 years it happened? Well, it turns out maybe not. But is it as bad or useless as now people say it is? Probably not.
Yeah. That is like a societal thing, though. You're right. And you're putting out like a nice observation that everyone takes things to the 11 out of 10.
Totally.
And then they go the other way and say it's a 1 out of 10.
Yeah, yeah. And I think the truth is somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, it almost always is, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So that's also maybe something that I think I see, I imagine you see as well.
Yeah. Or it probably leads to you also not being knee-jerk or overreacting to anything in the moment, like having just a touch of patience to say, let's see if this is something that's going to stick for a while or if it's more fad.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or passing, you know, notion or something like that.
Yep. Yeah, I think well said. I think there's an important sort of mindset that you can bring to those moments, right, to help center yourself and recognize what the impact may be.
Yeah. Okay. As we sort of wind down our time together, you know, one of the things we see is the same thing you see, is the joy that comes with everyone being more attentive to health and wellness, and that things that maybe formerly were harder to discuss or whatever have been destigmatized. we're in a great era where people are more focused on physical, mental, and emotional health. So I always like to know what's one thing, you probably do 20 things, but maybe what's one thing that is sort of sacred to you for your own personal health and wellness?
Oh, fun question. You know, a couple things that I found personally. One is that even if I take that hour out of my fixed amount of time to get something else done, to do some physical activity, I'm better in the 1 hour less remaining time, net. And I think that's something that we've even seen and believe, at the office. For example, we as a company, not every day, but often we'll go out and play knockout. And we do it with the whole team. And certainly, there are roles in our company where, it's about output. It's about how many boxes can you pack. And you could argue that taking that 20 or 30 minutes makes it less. Well, I can tell you when we look at the numbers, it's actually more. And that obviously is anecdotal, right? It's one example, but it's real.
Yeah.
So I fundamentally believe that. And I believe that for my wife, I believe that for our daughter, for myself, for our team, for our business, for the community. I'll tell you what I have fallen in love with, which is kind of funny to say, and it makes me a little embarrassed, but is basketball.
Is that right?
I never really played team sports as a kid, and I certainly didn't, in my 20s. And yeah, at like 36, 37 years old, I walked into the gym up here in Netherlands on a night when they had some pickup games and asked them to teach me. And it has been super fun, and I'm obsessed. I play 3-4 times a week, play in the City League in Boulder. I'm tall-ish, but not tall for basketball. I'm 6 feet tall, and I get hammered by some 6'8" 22-year-old like super athletes, and man, it's fun.
That is hilarious. I used to be passionate about basketball, and it was one of my favorite things to do. And then I got a little paranoid about injuries and things like that as I got older, so I moved on from it. But I love that sport. Yeah. And it's funny that you found your own version of that at this stage of your life. That's super cool. Yeah. You're also a trout fisherman, I see.
I do. I love fishing. Yeah, absolutely.
Is that another way to get a little peace and solace?
Yeah, I wouldn't put that in the bucket of physical activity keeps me, fit. That's definitely not the case. But for whatever reason, when I get out, I fish a lot from a raft or a drift boat, and I think it's literally the one thing that I am fortunate to do where I don't have to try to be present. I'm completely overwhelmingly
unlatched.
Focused on that and only that, staring at a dot in the water.
Well, maybe one last thing, because you've been a founder and a leader for some time now.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you have the same thing, but like every year I need something to refresh myself, whether it's on the personal side or just a new way to think about the business or to challenge myself. Like, how do you keep things fresh?
Yeah, I mean, how do I keep things fresh? I ask people questions. I ask for help. I put a meaningful amount of time and energy into networking, not for the sake of trying to be connected to the right person, etc., but to be able to have folks who I can ask questions to. And I think inside of that one nuanced layer, I think we tend to ascribe skill to outcome and forget about the luck component. And so a lot of times it's connecting with people who maybe didn't have the quote unquote successful exit, but instead had the opposite. Yeah. And I don't know, I found in business, especially in the community we're in, John, that people are, they're really willing to help and share. And I think that's a beautiful thing. I mean, certainly I didn't find that in athletics, athletics is a lot more cutthroat.
Yeah, for sure.
So that support element is huge. And I think you have to be proactive about it. At least I have to be proactive about it. It doesn't just happen. You got to sort of seek it out.
I share your sentiments 1,000%. I take a portion of every single week and devote it to being with others outside my business for inspiration, for conversation, for learning, things not to do, things to do, all of it. How to me is very fulfilling.
How do you do that? How do you set a certain chunk of time? How does that work for you?
I literally carve it out in my schedule. It's not like the same time every time, but I know going into a week or going into a month, I want 10 to 20% of my time to be interacting with people outside our company. Not even clients necessarily.
Yep.
it's other sources of inspiration. I'm insanely curious like you are.
Yeah.
And I can't tell you how many things I've picked up just in informal conversations with people that have been on different journeys, and something I never thought about that expands my mindset, and I love that. So for me, it's like fuel. If I don't do it for weeks at a time because I'm really heads down in a busy time at work, I feel it almost physically. Like, I got to get out and see some people to sort of give me some juice for this next little window of time or whatever it might be.
Yeah. That's neat. What I hear is the framework of defining those buckets, you know, and allowing them to maybe then to fill up on their own. But you've created space for them. So.
For sure, 100%.
That's awesome. Very cool.
Well, hey, I really appreciate you coming out with me. It's very nice of you. I just kind of reached out to you blindly. We don't know each other very well, but this was a fun conversation and a chance to meet another new person on top of it all. So
yeah, fill up your bucket a little bit.
That's right. Check. It's only Monday morning. So
awesome. Well, thank you, John. Appreciate it.
Yeah, appreciate it. We'll see you guys out on the trail again here sometime soon. Take care, everybody.